I wasn't supposed to find out like that. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind that slips by unnoticed, where nothing remarkable is expected to happen. I was sitting at my small desk by the window, half focused on work emails and half lost in my own thoughts. A cup of coffee sat beside me, already gone cold because I had forgotten about it, like I often did when my mind wandered too far. Life had been quiet lately, predictable, safe, and I had worked hard for that kind of peace. The house around me reflected that effort. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every little detail had been chosen by me, paid for by me, carried in by me. There was no one else to thank, no one else to credit. It wasn't just a house, it was proof. Proof that I could build something on my own, even when no one believed I could. That's why, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the security cameras I had recently installed, I almost ignored it. I had only set them up a week ago after my neighbor mentioned a couple of break-ins down the street. At the time, it felt like a responsible thing to do, nothing more. I didn't expect to actually need them. So when the notification popped up, I assumed it was nothing serious. Maybe a delivery driver. Maybe a stray cat passing by. Maybe even just a glitch. Still, something in me hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second longer than necessary. Then I tapped it. The app opened, and within seconds, the live footage appeared. At first, my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. The angle was from the camera positioned in the living room, giving a clear view of the front door, the couch, and the dining area. Everything looked normal, until it didn't, because someone was inside. No, not someone, 3 people. I leaned forward, my heart beginning to beat faster as recognition hit me like a sudden drop. My mother, my father, and my brother. For a moment, I genuinely thought I was misunderstanding what I was seeing. That maybe this was old footage, or some kind of playback error. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation, something that would make this make sense. But there was no mistake. They were there, inside my house. My first feeling wasn't anger, it was confusion. I hadn't given them a key. I hadn't invited them over. I hadn't even told them I'd be out, because I wasn't. I was just in another room, completely unaware that they had entered my space like it belonged to them. A strange, uneasy feeling crept up my spine as I watched my mother walk across the living room. She moved slowly, her eyes scanning everything, the walls, the furniture, the small details I had spent so much time perfecting. She didn't look like a guest. She looked like someone evaluating. My father followed behind her. His hands clasped behind his back, his expression thoughtful. He paused near the dining table, glancing at the chairs as if mentally rearranging them. My brother came last. He walked in casually, like he had done it 100 times before, like there was nothing unusual about this at all. His hands were in his pockets, his posture relaxed, his eyes drifting lazily from one corner of the room to another. Then he sat down on my couch, like it was his. Something in my chest tightened. I quickly rewound the footage, my fingers slightly shaky now, and played it again, this time with the volume turned up. At first, it was just the sound of footsteps, the faint rustle of movement, the creak of the floorboards. Then my mother's voice broke through. "This will be perfect for him," she said. I froze. Her tone wasn't casual. It wasn't a passing comment. It was certain. Deliberate. I felt my stomach drop as I watched her gesture toward the living room. Her hand sweeping lightly through the air, as if presenting the space. "She doesn't need all this space anyway," she added. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were surprising, but because they were familiar. That subtle dismissal. That quiet way of minimizing everything I had done, everything I had built. As if my efforts were always excessive, unnecessary, undeserved. My father nodded slowly. "She'll understand," he said. "We'll talk to her. It's for family. For family." I almost laughed, but nothing about this felt funny. My brother didn't say anything right away. He just leaned back slightly, looking around again with that same expression, one I had seen so many times growing up. It was a look of quiet satisfaction, like something was already his, even before it officially became his. Then he smiled. And that smile, it broke something in me. Because I knew it too well. It was the same smile he wore every time our parents chose him over me. Every time he got something without asking, without earning, without even acknowledging it. The same smile that said, without words, "Of course this is mine." I felt a rush of memories hit me all at once. Birthdays where his gifts were bigger. Decisions where his opinions mattered more. Moments where I was expected to give up, to adjust, to understand. Because that's just how things were. Because he needed it more. Because I was strong enough to handle less. And now, apparently, that included my house. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, not with shock anymore, but with something else. Something sharper. Clearer. Everything began to make sense in a way it hadn't before. The sudden increase in calls from my parents. The way they had been asking more questions about my finances, my mortgage, my long-term plans. The comments about how I was doing well enough on my own. The subtle suggestions that I should think about the future. And what's best for everyone? At the time, I had brushed it off, told myself they were just being parents. That maybe, just maybe, they were finally taking an interest in my life. But this wasn't concern. This was calculation. They weren't checking on me. They were assessing what I had and deciding how to take it. A strange calm settled over me as the realization fully sank in. It didn't feel like panic. It didn't even feel like heartbreak. It felt like clarity. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't second-guessing myself. I wasn't wondering if I was overreacting or misinterpreting things. I was seeing the truth exactly as it was. And it was ugly. I let the video play a little longer, watching them move through my home like it was already theirs, listening to their quiet conversations, their assumptions, their plans. Then I paused it. The room around me felt different now. Not unsafe, but changed. Like a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. I set my phone down slowly, my mind already moving ahead, already thinking beyond the shock, beyond the hurt. Because one thing had become very clear. They thought they could take this from me. They thought I would go along with it. They thought I would stay quiet. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in the face of them. I felt ready. Because this time, I wasn't going to let them decide what I deserved. I didn't confront them immediately. That would have been my instinct before. To pick up the phone, to demand answers, to ask questions I already knew they would twist into something else. I used to believe that if I just said the right thing, if I just explained myself clearly enough, they would finally hear me. Finally understand. But experience had taught me something far more valuable. They never listened to understand. They listened to respond, to redirect, to regain control. So this time, I stayed quiet. Not out of fear, out of intention. I sat with what I had seen, replaying it in my mind over and over again. Every word, every glance, every subtle tone carried meaning now. It wasn't just a random intrusion, it was a plan. A quiet, calculated plan that had probably been forming long before I ever noticed. That realization didn't make me panic. It made me careful. I picked up my phone again and reopened the footage. This time, I watched it like I was studying evidence. I paused at moments I had missed before. My mother's expression when she looked at the walls, my father's posture as he examined the space, my brother's ease, his complete lack of hesitation. None of them looked like they were doing something wrong. That was the part that unsettled me the most. There was no guilt. No uncertainty. Just entitlement. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly as a strange clarity settled in. For so long, I had questioned myself in this family dynamic, wondered if I was too sensitive, too distant, too unwilling to compromise. But now, watching them like this, without their usual filters, I saw the truth in its rawest form. They didn't see me as someone with boundaries. They saw me as someone who could be persuaded, managed, moved. And that assumption was exactly what I was about to break. Over the next few days, I didn't change my routine. I went to work, responded to messages, went about my life as if nothing had happened. If they suspected I knew anything, they didn't show it. But the cameras told me everything I needed to know. Another alert came in 2 days later. This time I didn't hesitate before opening it. They were back. The same 3 figures stepping into my home like it belonged to them. But something about this visit felt different immediately. More deliberate. My father was carrying a folder. I felt my chest tighten as I watched him walk straight to the dining table and set it down carefully, almost ceremoniously. My mother stood beside him, her posture more focused now, less casual than before. My brother lingered for a moment, then pulled out a chair and sat down, leaning back like he had all the time in the world. I turned up the volume again. Papers slid across the table as my father opened the folder. The sound was small, but it felt loud in my ears, like the opening of something irreversible. "We just need her signature," he said. Simple, confident, as if that was the only step left. My mother nodded immediately. "She won't refuse?" she replied. "She owes us." The words hit harder this time. "Owes us." I felt something inside me twist, not in confusion, but in recognition. That belief had always been there, buried under years of subtle expectations and unspoken pressure. The idea that everything I had was somehow connected to them. That my success wasn't fully mine. That I was still, in some invisible way, indebted. I had just never heard it said so plainly before. My grip tightened around my phone as I continued to watch. Owes them for what? For the years I spent trying to earn their approval. For the sacrifices I made to build a life they barely supported. For teaching myself independence because I had no other choice. I remembered the nights I stayed up studying while working part-time just to cover my expenses. The weekends I skipped outings because I needed to save money. The constant balancing act of surviving and striving at the same time. They weren't there for any of that. Not in the way that mattered. And yet, here they were, speaking as if everything I had built was simply an extension of their generosity. My brother finally leaned forward, glancing at the papers. "So when are we doing this?" he asked casually. Not if, when. I felt a quiet, bitter understanding settle in. This wasn't a discussion to them. It was a formality. A step in a process they had already decided would happen. "We'll talk to her soon," my father said. "We just need to present it the right way." My mother smiled faintly. "She responds better when it feels like her idea." I let out a slow breath, my eyes still fixed on the screen. That part didn't even surprise me. Of course they had a strategy. Of course they planned to frame it in a way that made me feel like I was choosing it, like I was being reasonable, generous, cooperative. That had always been their method, not force. Manipulation. Gentle pressure disguised as love. Expectations wrapped in concern. I watched as my father gathered the papers again, tapping them neatly into place before closing the folder. My mother adjusted a chair slightly, as if already imagining how things would look once everything was settled. My brother stood up, stretching lightly, his expression relaxed, satisfied, as if the outcome was already guaranteed. The video ended shortly after that, the motion alert cutting off as they left the frame. I stared at the blank screen for a long moment, letting the silence settle around me. There was no rush of panic, no overwhelming wave of emotion, just something steady, something grounded. They thought they understood me. That was their biggest mistake. They thought I would react the way I always had, hesitant, unsure, eager to keep the peace even at my own expense. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. Not after everything it took to build this life. Not after everything I had learned about standing on my own. I set my phone down and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees as my mind shifted from reaction to action. If this was a game to them, then I needed to stop playing by their rules. I wasn't going to confront them emotionally. I wasn't going to argue or defend myself in circles. I was going to be prepared, carefully. Thoroughly, I began taking notes, not just mentally, but physically. Dates, times, what was said, what was implied. I saved the footage in multiple places, making sure there was no way it could be lost or dismissed. Because this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about boundaries, about ownership, about finally drawing a line that should have been drawn a long time ago. The anger I felt wasn't explosive. It was controlled, focused. Like a slow burn that wasn't going to fade, it was going to fuel something. Something deliberate. Something undeniable. They had made their move, quietly, confidently, assuming I wouldn't notice until it was too late. But they were wrong, I noticed. And now, I was ready to respond. Not as the person they thought I was, but as the person they never expected me to become. I invited them over for dinner 2 days later. Even typing the message felt strange, like I was stepping into a role I had already outgrown. My fingers hovered over the screen before I hit send, a small part of me still expecting that familiar hesitation to creep in. The old instinct to avoid conflict. To delay. To pretend everything was fine. But that instinct didn't come. Instead, there was a quiet certainty. If they wanted access to my house so badly, I would give it to them, just not in the way they expected. My mother replied almost immediately. "Oh, finally," she wrote. "We've been meaning to spend time together. We were just talking about you." I stared at that message for a moment longer than necessary, a faint, humorless smile tugging at my lips. I knew exactly what they had been talking about. Still, I confirmed the time, kept my tone neutral, and set everything in motion. The day of the dinner felt unusually calm. There was no rushing, no anxious energy. I moved through the house slowly, deliberately, preparing things not just for appearance, but for control. Every detail mattered now. The dining table was set neatly. The lighting was soft but clear. The space looked warm, inviting, exactly the kind of environment they would feel comfortable in. But beneath that surface, everything was different. The cameras were on, every angle covered, every word that would be spoken, every expression that would cross their faces, it would all be captured. Not because I wanted drama, but because I wanted truth. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath before answering. And there they were. Standing together, just like in the footage. My father in front, composed and confident. My mother beside him, her expression already softened into something pleasant, something rehearsed. My brother slightly behind them, relaxed, almost bored. For a brief second, it felt like stepping back into an old version of my life. The version where I would automatically step aside, let them in, adjust myself to fit whatever dynamic they brought with them. But this time, I didn't shrink. I opened the door fully and let them walk in. "Smells nice," my mother said as she stepped inside, glancing around with the same evaluating eyes I had seen on camera. "Thank you," I replied evenly. My father nodded at me, offering a small smile. "Good to see you." My brother gave a casual wave, already moving toward the living room as if it was second nature. I watched them settle in, taking their places like they belonged there. The familiarity of it all would have once made me uncomfortable, maybe even insecure. Now, it just confirmed everything I already knew. We sat down at the table, and for a while, everything played out exactly as expected. Small talk. Work updates. Questions about my routine, my plans, my life. I answered politely, but briefly. I didn't offer more than necessary. I didn't fill the silence the way I used to, and slowly, they began to notice. There was a subtle shift in the air, a slight tension, almost imperceptible, but present. They weren't used to me being this contained. Usually, I would carry the conversation, smooth things over, make sure everything felt comfortable. But tonight, I let the pauses linger. I let them feel the space. Eventually, my father cleared his throat. "There's something we wanted to discuss," he said, his tone measured. There it was. Right on cue. I leaned back slightly in my chair, my expression neutral. "Go ahead." My mother glanced at him briefly before stepping in, her voice soft, almost careful. "We've been thinking about the future," she began. "About what's best for everyone." I didn't respond. I just watched. My father reached down and pulled out the folder, the same one I had seen through the camera. The sight of it didn't shock me anymore. If anything, it grounded me, made everything clearer. "You've done very well for yourself," he continued. "We're proud of you." The words felt hollow. Not because I had never wanted to hear them, but because I knew they weren't the point. "You're independent," he added. "Strong. You've built a good life." I nodded slightly, letting him speak. "And because of that," he said, sliding the folder onto the table, "we think it might be time to make a decision that benefits the whole family." My mother leaned forward, her tone gentle but persuasive. "You don't really need all this space. It's a lot for one person." There it was again. The same narrative. The same quiet dismissal of everything I had built. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not hurt. Just clarity. My brother finally spoke, leaning forward with an easy confidence that made my jaw tighten slightly. "It just makes sense," he said. "I mean, I'm trying to get things started, you know." This place would be perfect. Perfect for him. I looked at him then, really looked at him. At the way he avoided any acknowledgement of what this actually meant. At the way he framed it like a practical solution, not a massive overstep. He wasn't asking. He was expecting. And that expectation had been fed to him his entire life. I turned my attention back to my father as he opened the folder and slid the papers toward me. All it needs is your signature, he said calmly. The simplicity of that sentence almost made me laugh. As if years of effort, sacrifice, and independence could be reduced to a single moment. A single pen stroke. I lowered my gaze to the documents, scanning them briefly. Legal language. Transfer of ownership. Everything laid out clearly, efficiently, planned. I could feel their eyes on me as I read. Waiting, expecting, certain. But instead of reacting, instead of questioning or hesitating, I leaned back slightly and looked up at them. Interesting, I said quietly. My tone made my mother blink. My father's expression tightened just slightly. How exactly were you planning to make this happen? I asked. There was a brief pause. Not long enough to be obvious, but enough. We're discussing it now, my father replied, his voice steady. I tilted my head slightly, studying him. Now, I repeated. My brother shifted in his seat, a faint impatience creeping into his posture. Yeah, now. That's the point of this conversation. I held his gaze for a second before letting a small, controlled smile form. Not warm, not inviting, something else, something they didn't recognize. Because it wasn't the smile of someone trying to keep the peace. It was the smile of someone who already knew the truth, and was just waiting for the right moment to reveal it. You've already been here, haven't you? I said quietly. The words didn't need to be loud to land. They hit exactly where I wanted them to. For a second, no one moved. It was like the air itself had been pulled tight, stretched thin between us. My mother's expression flickered first, just a slight widening of her eyes, before she forced them back into something controlled. I don't know what you mean, she said, too quickly. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I reached for my phone. The motion was slow, deliberate. I could feel their attention sharpen, their bodies subtly shifting as if bracing for something they couldn't yet see. My father's posture straightened, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. My brother leaned back slightly, but the ease he carried earlier had started to crack. I tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward them, and pressed play. The video began without introduction. Their faces appeared first, familiar, undeniable. The angle from the living room camera captured everything clearly: the way they walked in, the way they looked around, the way they settled into a space they had no right to claim. No one spoke at first, they just watched. Or rather, they were forced to watch themselves. My mother's hand flew to her mouth halfway through the clip, her breath catching as her own voice filled the room. This will be perfect for him. The sentence echoed, heavier now than it had been the first time I heard it. Not because of what it meant. I already understood that, but because now, there was no escaping it, no reframing it, no pretending it had been taken out of context. My father's expression hardened as the footage continued, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he could somehow will it to stop. But he didn't interrupt, he didn't reach for the phone. He just sat there, watching. My brother shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his gaze darting between the screen and the table, his earlier confidence slipping further with each passing second. Then came the part with the folder. Would just need her signature. I paused the video. Silence dropped heavily over the room. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. I lowered the phone slowly, placing it on the table between us like evidence in a trial that had already been decided. You broke into my house, I said, my voice calm, steady, controlled. You stood in my living room and planned how to take it from me. My mother shook her head quickly, her composure cracking. We didn't break in, she insisted. We just let yourselves in. I interrupted, my tone still even. Without permission, she faltered. That's not how this works, I continued. Not legally, not morally, not in any way that makes this acceptable. My father finally spoke, his voice lower now, less certain. We were going to talk to you. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see authority. I saw someone trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping away. You were going to pressure me, I said. There's a difference. He didn't answer. Because there wasn't anything to say. My mother leaned forward slightly, her voice softening, reaching for something familiar. We're your parents? She said. We're just thinking about what's best for the family. The words might have worked on me once. They might have made me hesitate, question myself, feel guilty for even pushing back. But now, they sounded exactly like what they were. A tactic. For the family, I repeated quietly. Or for him. I nodded slightly toward my brother. He stiffened immediately, his defensive edge returning. Why are you making this into something it's not? He snapped. It's just a house. The casual dismissal lit something cold inside me. Not anger. Not anymore. Just a clear, unwavering certainty. I met his gaze without flinching. No, I said. It's my house. The words didn't come out loud. They didn't need to. They were firm enough to fill the entire room. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time, he looked unsure. Not just annoyed or defensive, but genuinely caught off guard. Because I wasn't playing my usual role. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't explaining or justifying or trying to make them understand. I was stating facts. And there was nothing they could do with that. I worked for this. I continued, my voice steady. Every payment, every decision, every risk. This didn't come from you. It didn't come from luck. It came from me. My father exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face as if trying to process everything at once. You're overreacting, he said, though there was no real conviction behind it. I almost smiled. Am I asked. I picked up the phone again and tapped the screen, pulling up another clip. Another angle, another moment of them inside my home. I have multiple recordings, I said. Different days. Different conversations. All of it documented. That got his attention. Really got it. His posture shifted, tension settling into his shoulders as the reality of the situation became unavoidable. This isn't just a misunderstanding, I added. This is evidence. My mother's face had gone pale now, her earlier confidence completely gone. You wouldn't use that against us, she said, her voice quieter, almost pleading. There it was, the shift. From certainty to doubt. From control to vulnerability. I held her gaze. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the pull to comfort her. I've already spoken to a lawyer, I said. The words landed harder than anything else I had said so far. My father's head snapped up slightly, his eyes locking onto mine. A lawyer, he repeated. Yes. The room felt smaller now, tighter, like the walls themselves were closing in around the truth. What you did is illegal, I continued. Entering my property without permission. Attempting to manipulate ownership documents. If I wanted to, I could take this further. Silence. Heavy, unavoidable. My brother scoffed, but it sounded forced now. You're not actually going to do that, he said. You're not that kind of person. I tilted my head slightly. Not that kind of person, I echoed. The irony almost made me laugh. You mean the kind of person who protects what's theirs? I asked. The kind of person who sets boundaries when they're crossed. He didn't answer. Because the answer didn't matter. What mattered was that they were finally seeing me differently. Not as someone they could influence. Not as someone they could outmaneuver. But as someone who was done. My father's voice came again, quieter this time, stripped of its earlier authority. You wouldn't do that to your own family. I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the moment settle in completely. Then I answered. Without hesitation. Watch me. The words didn't carry anger, they carried certainty. And that was what made them final. They left that night without finishing dinner. No one slammed a door. No one raised their voice on the way out. It wasn't dramatic in the way people imagine confrontations to be. It was quieter than that. Heavier. My mother gathered her bag with trembling hands, avoiding my eyes completely. My father muttered something under his breath, something about thinking this through. But it sounded more like he was trying to convince himself than me. My brother walked out first, jaw tight, shoulders stiff, like anger was the only thing holding him together. And just like that, they were gone. The door clicked shut behind them, and the silence that followed felt different from any silence I had ever known. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything that had finally been said without actually needing to be spoken. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, half expecting that familiar wave of doubt to creep in. The second, guessing, the guilt. The urge to call them back, to smooth things over, to make it all less uncomfortable. But it didn't come. Instead, there was something steady settling deep inside me. Something calm. I turned back toward the dining table slowly. The plates were still there, untouched. The food I had prepared sat cooling in the quiet room, a reminder of how differently the evening had been meant to go. For a second, I let myself feel it, not regret, but acknowledgement. This wasn't easy. It never was when it came to them. But easy had never protected me. I began clearing the table, moving methodically, giving my hands something to do while my mind caught up with everything that had just happened. Each plate I picked up felt like a small step forward, a quiet act of reclaiming my space. By the time the kitchen was clean, something had shifted even further. It wasn't just that I had stood up to them. It was that I had followed through. And that changed everything. The next morning, I didn't wake up feeling victorious. I woke up feeling clear. There was no confusion left. No lingering what ifs. Or maybe I misunderstood. The situation was exactly what it was, and for once, I wasn't trying to soften it. I reached for my phone and reread the notes I had taken, the timestamps, the saved footage. Everything was organized, backed up, ready. Not because I wanted to escalate things unnecessarily, but because I respected myself enough to be prepared. I made the call to the lawyer later that day. It was brief, direct, and surprisingly straightforward. I explained the situation, shared the evidence, and listened carefully as they outlined my options: legal boundaries, formal notices, steps I could take to ensure this didn't happen again. Each word felt like reinforcement, not of conflict, but of protection. By the end of the call, I wasn't anxious. I was certain. The notices were sent within the week. Clear, professional, and impossible to misinterpret. They established exactly what needed to be established: that my property was mine, that any unauthorized access would have consequences, and that any attempt to pressure or manipulate me into transferring ownership would not be tolerated. It wasn't aggressive. It was firm, and for the first time in my life I didn't feel guilty for being firm. Their response came slowly. At first it was silence. Then messages. My mother texted first. Short, emotional, carefully worded. "We didn't mean to hurt you." A pause. Then another message. "You're misunderstanding everything." I read them without reacting, without immediately reaching for a reply. The old version of me would have responded within minutes, trying to fix the situation, trying to explain, trying to reconnect. This time I let the messages sit, because I finally understood something important. Not every message deserves an answer. My father called a day later. I watched the phone ring, his name on the screen, the familiarity of it tugging at something deep in my chest. For a brief second, my thumb hovered over the accept button. Then I let it ring out. Not out of spite, but out of choice. Because I wasn't ready to step back into that dynamic, and I didn't have to be. More messages followed over the next few days. Some defensive, some emotional, some attempting to shift blame in subtle ways. "We were only thinking about the family. You've changed. We don't understand why you're being like this." That last one almost made me smile, because for the first time, I understood exactly why I was being like this. I had stopped accepting less than I deserved. I had stopped bending just to keep things comfortable. I had stopped confusing silence with peace. Extended family eventually got involved, just like I knew they would. An aunt called, her tone concerned but laced with quiet judgment. "Family matters shouldn't be handled this way," she said. "You should sit down and talk it out." I listened politely. Then I answered calmly. "I did talk," I said. "Now I'm setting boundaries." There was a pause on the other end of the line, like she wasn't sure what to do with that response. Because boundaries weren't something I had ever been allowed to have before. But that had changed. And it wasn't changing back. Days turned into weeks. The house felt different during that time. Not because anything physical had changed, but because the weight I had been carrying for so long was finally gone. There was no tension in the walls anymore. No unspoken expectations lingering in the corners. No invisible pressure to be more, give more, sacrifice more. Just space. Just quiet. Just mine. I started noticing small things again. The way sunlight moved across the living room floor in the afternoon. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the background. The comfort of sitting on my own couch without feeling like I had to justify it. It was subtle, but powerful. Because for the first time, I wasn't sharing this space with their expectations. I was fully in it. One evening, I found myself sitting in the living room, the same spot where I had first watched the footage that changed everything. My phone rested beside me, silent. For a moment, I thought about everything that had led to this point. All the years of trying to be enough. All the times I had minimized myself to avoid conflict. All the quiet compromises that slowly added up until I barely recognized where I ended and their expectations began. And then I thought about now. About the way I had said no. The way I had held my ground. The way I had chosen myself without apologizing for it. It didn't feel dramatic. It didn't feel like some grand victory. It felt right, simple, solid. My phone buzzed suddenly, pulling me out of my thoughts. Emotion alert. For a split second, my body tensed out of habit. The memory of that first notification still fresh enough to trigger something instinctive. I picked up the phone and opened the app. The camera feed came into view. And there it was. A small stray cat wandering across the front porch, pausing briefly before curling up near the steps. I let out a quiet breath, a faint smile forming without effort. Nothing was being taken. Nothing was being planned. Nothing was being threatened. Just a quiet, ordinary moment. I set the phone back down and leaned into the couch, letting the calm settle around me. Because now, I finally understood something that had taken me years to learn. Being related to someone doesn't give them the right to take from you. And love, real love, doesn't come with conditions that require you to lose yourself. The house wasn't just a house anymore. It was a boundary, a statement, a reflection of everything I had built and everything I had refused to give away. And as I sat there, surrounded by the quiet I had fought so hard to protect, one thought settled clearly in my mind. They had underestimated me. And that had been their biggest mistake. Because they thought my silence meant weakness. They thought my patience meant permission. They thought my love meant compliance. But what they never understood was this. Being underestimated is where strength begins. And I had finally stepped into mine.